let's take a look at the 2024 Grammys as an example. As a mass ritual, as a pop culture cultural mass ritual, and coincidentally or not, this was the 66th Grammy Awards. Any significance there?
Yeah, there is. The I follow every single one of these big award shows. I don't enjoy them, but I do them every time they're on because this is anytime you got an event where you have massive amounts of people focusing their energy on it, like the Super Bowl, for instance. That seems to be the prime ideal time for the occult magic to happen, so to speak. And the 66th Grammys would be that's an important number in the occult when you look into the philosophy of Kabbalah. It's like a Jewish mysticism sort of occult concept. And they believe in the Kabbalistic tree of life. And that model that they create, there is a dark side to the Kabbalistic tree of life that they call the Klipoth. And that's the realm of the fallen angels. It's where it's kind of a duality principle of, because a lot of these Gnostics and stuff like this, they believe in the idea of light and dark, good and evil. So if you've got a good side to the Kabbalistic tree of life, there's also the evil side, the dark side, which is where the Klipoth are. And on the Klipoth side, there's 66 fallen angels. And this goes, I mean, we could like nerd out. I don't want people their eyes to gloss over, but I read a lot of different resources, and there's one I always talk about, Peter Levenda. I want to get him on my show someday. I can't track this guy down, but he knows everything. I swear, because I've read a bunch of his books, and he understands the concepts of the occult. I don't know if it's because he's a practitioner or not, but Peter Levenda wrote a book called The Dark Lord, and he describes all of these concepts and how they fit into the dark side of the Kabbalistic tree of life, because that's where these practitioners think that they can get down to the fundamental root of what they call the prima materia in alchemy. It's the foundation of matter, and from there they can birth dreams into reality. They can manifest things into reality. It's where creativity resides. They call it the cellar of the soul, where the beast resides, and it's supposed to represent the unconscious mind or the shadow. And sometimes they'll call it the Citra Aura. But anyway, the whole idea is that this is related to the idea of the shadow that Carl Jung talks about. And it's basically a dark realm, and different artists can somehow tap into this dark realm, and it can give them creative abilities. Now, this ties us into a lot of the ideas of the Faustian bargain. People talk about how people sell their soul to the devil in exchange for fame and fortune. And a lot of people always ask me, well, what does that look like? Is it, are these artists sitting in a room with the devil across the table? They sign a contract, and then now they got to give them their soul, and then what happens? Well, Robert Johnson was a blues singer, and he talked about he went to the crossroads and he sold his soul to the devil, and he came back and he was able to play the guitar very well. That was actually cited by some of his close friends that this really happened. And Led Zeppelin's Robert Plant, he bought into this idea. He went down to the crossroads and took a bunch of dirt with him. Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin was a huge follower of Aleister Crowley.
Bought his old house, Boleskine.
Yeah, he did. And then I read a couple years ago that it burned down, and people were raising money to rebuild it. And Boleskine in Scotland is actually next to the lake where Loch Ness, where Nessie, the famous sort of sea monster, resides. Probably because Aleister Crowley was doing a bunch of magic rituals and channeling entities and all that. But anyways, the Faustian bargain ties into this, because I think that these artists try to tap into a dark side based on this Kabbalistic teaching, and in return they get these creative abilities to make good music or whatever. And I do think that not every artist goes down this path, but it seems like more and more these artists have been showing us this sort of dark side to how this works. And at the Grammys, of course, it's a celebration of music. We saw a lot of dark symbolism with And it doesn't seem like that on the surface. You got to really geek out and nerd out on these occult concepts. And a major takeaway from the 2024 Grammys was the symbolism of Saturn. We saw it with the first performance of the night, which was Dua Lipa. She was singing in a cube that was red and black. That's the colors of Saturn. And then she moves into a flattened hexagram, which is, that's a cube. And then we saw, and I'll explain why Saturn's important here in a minute, but let me throw out a couple more examples. Doja Cat, she's been going through a very strange transformation. Her most recent album was based upon her turning into her alter ego that she calls Scarlet, which references the Scarlet Woman from the Book of Revelation, which facilitates the Antichrist in the end times. But she showed up to the Grammys with some face tattoos that I'm pretty sure they weren't real, but there were some face tattoos she had. And one of them was the scythe of the Grim Reaper, the big, sickle he uses. And the Grim Reaper is a symbol for Saturn. And side note, she also had tattooed across her face, Dilara Findakoglu, I think is how you pronounce her name. She was this artist who is very heavy into the occult and Satanism. And she had a fashion show inside of a St. Andrew's Church where she had all these artists dressed up with satanic symbolism. Like one had the sigil of Lucifer on its face, and she had the checkered floor like in the Freemasonic temples. So anyways, these artists, they're really employing a lot of dark energies that I'd argue we haven't seen before. And when it comes to Saturn, this is my last piece on the Grammys here, with the Saturn symbolism, it all culminated with an artist named SZA, who, she was a big name for a long time, but for whatever reason, this night I noticed there was an extra special amount of attention given to her, and she performed a new single, and that single was, of course, called Saturn, because we see all these symbols throughout the whole night. And why that's important is because when you study the occult, there are different secret societies who practice, different occult things like magic and such. And one of them is the Brotherhood of Saturn. And, they're similar to the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. They've got 33 degrees of initiation. And the end of the path for a member of the Brotherhood of Saturn is self-deification. And again, I'm going to point back to like what this is all about. This is all about man pursuing his own will to become God. And that's what the end goal is for almost every single occult belief system that exists. And that's why you see these celebrities pushing this idea. When Kanye West said he was Jesus and that he belonged in the Bible, when Jay-Z called himself Hova, as in Jehovah, and he also was sporting some Aleister Crowley hoodie once. And then these are all massive topics. We could go on for an hour each, with Jay-Z and, but anyways, Beyonce, same thing. But anyways, the Brotherhood of Saturn, the takeaway of why Saturn is important is because it is focusing on Saturn as the adversarial planet. And that's what these people are all about. They call it antinomianism. They are trying to embrace the darkness because Saturn is the 6th planet from the sun, and it used to be the furthest planet. Back when they came up with a lot of these ideas, this was the furthest planet they could see, and they thought it was the outcast. In ancient Egypt, it was considered Set, which is the outcast, sort of separated from humanity, and it's the adversary. And they believe, to put a bow on this thing, they believe that the adversary who is casted out in the darkness, kind of like the dark side of the tree of life, that darkness has an important role in our dualistic view of humanity, meaning without darkness, you can't have light. So they believe in embracing these dark concepts, embracing the shadow in order for our society to become whole.
On the surface, it sounds, it doesn't sound malevolent necessarily. To make our world whole, to embrace the dark and the light, dualism. Those are all things, I think, on the surface, again, a Christian or someone with faith could buy into. But does this symbolism go further? Does it have actual power? And are they invoking, let's call them demons or dark entities, whatever you want to call them, dark energy, for occasionally malevolent purposes?
Yeah, I think so. And I think and that's the question I struggle with all the time. I am a very terrible Christian, but I nonetheless am still a Christian. And I don't know, because some of these occult practices I find to be uplifting for people sometimes. I don't think, I've got friends who do shadow work. And when I read these occult things, it always leads me down to the end of the trail, which is embracing of Luciferian concepts. And I would like to think, my priest would definitely say otherwise, but I would like to think that one could enjoy the self-improvement aspects of some of these practices. Yoga is a great example. Yoga is an occult practice that's it means to yoke, to union with gods, which is a very pagan sort of concept. And that doesn't mean that, people's moms that are going to yoga on Wednesday night are worshiping the devil. That's not what that means. I think I would like to think that you can find a sort of secular purpose for even law of attraction kind of stuff, thinking power, positive thinking. I think those are valuable tools for some people, but there are definitely people who want to change our world into a more self-centered world, which, like for instance, there was a book I read about called Infernal Magic. It's about this occult group called the Order of Nine Angles, a very satanic group. They openly call for human population reduction to get rid of the sort of inferior people, which is what we saw in the Georgia Guidestones as well. And a lot of these things, it's very insidious, because on the surface, like you said, you hear it and you're like, I don't know, this doesn't sound terrible. But when you keep going down the trail, you find what they really believe. And anyways, in this book, they talk about these practices and sigils and symbols and how they are used to implant concepts and thoughts into the subconscious of the masses. And it creates work that, change happens below the level of conscious thought. And that's where I come in to try to decode events like this. At least I'm doing the best I can to try to make it less confusing, to try to bring awareness to it, so that people, when they go to concerts, and it's a pretty universal thing. You go to a concert and people are doing the devil horn, the mano cornuto hand. And it's like, well, I mean, that really is a witch hex. That really is tied to an occult concept. Anton LaVey did it in the Church of Satan. It really was a dark symbol. And I think as long as people are aware of what that is, and they maybe make sure their influences are where they need to be. Like I listen to Ozzy Osbourne. I like Ozzy Osbourne. I like all these metal bands. And I would like to think that I can take the awareness of where these concepts are trying to take me and make the conscious decision of, okay, can I listen to Ozzy Osbourne and not start worshiping the devil, and keep focused on my faith and trying to do the right thing for Christ and live a Christ, the way Christ wanted me to live. And I'd like to think I can do that. Like I said, I'm sure my priest would say that's not a wise choice, but that's the world I live in. So